Hello and welcome to this video. So in this short clip, I'll go through the content overview of HCIA Datacom version 1.0. HCIA Datacom is Huawei's entry-level network engineering professional certification. Those who do it successfully can always ask for a certification exam, which is valued at $200. You pay and sit at any Pearson VUE certified testing center. If you pass the exam, you're HCIA certified. HCIA Datacom version 1.0 certification is made up of a total of 10 modules. As we can see here, this is the first module, data communication network basis. The second module is construction of an interconnected IP network. The third one is construction of an Ethernet switching network. The fourth one is network security and network access basics. The fifth one is network services and applications. The sixth is wireless local area network basics. Then the wide area network basics is the seventh one. Network management, operation and maintenance is the eighth one. IP version 6, Internet Protocol version 6 basics is the ninth one. And finally, software-defined networking and automation basics. Now, each of these modules has a number of chapters in them, but some of the modules have only one chapter because they are either broad enough or they are kind of independent enough to make their own. A chapter is independent enough to make its own module. The very first module is made up of 3 chapters, which is really the very basics of network engineering. This course assumes zero network engineering knowledge, so you don't need to come with any prior network engineering experience. The very first chapter introduces you to telecommunication network, network engineering, network engineers, everything at the definition level that you need to know. After understanding and appreciating the depth of the knowledge we are about to cover, we go ahead and look at the standardization of that knowledge by use of the network reference models. We break down what network reference model is, what it is after, why we need it, and how it helps us understand and even troubleshoot enterprise networks. Finally, we introduce Huawei's network operating system called the Versatile Routing Platform. We look at the basic commands, the basic operations, the basic do's and don'ts of this operating system. In the second module, constructing an interconnected IP network, there are a total of 3 chapters also. The first one introduces network layer protocols generally, that inclusive of ICMP, of IP, IPX, IGMP, general overview of those protocols. And then it zeroes down to IP addressing. We start talking about IP addresses, the types of IP addresses, the functions, the structure, the uses, why it's needed, why it's a very important and main protocol in TCP/IP protocol stack. After that, we introduce IP routing basics. Normally, when we are communicating network, there is a sender, some other part of the world who is trying to send some information, some data to another part of the world. This data is going to travel from some terminal device, your laptop, your computer, your PC, your printer, to another terminal device elsewhere. Between the 2 terminal devices, there's going to be a number of network devices, interconnection devices, routers, switches, firewalls, and so on. Some of these devices, particularly routers, have the role of finding out where the destination networks are and how to reach them from the source networks. Now, the function those devices do is called routing. In this chapter, we introduce IP routing and talk about static routing, talk about dynamic routing, and so on. In the third chapter of the second module, we introduce Open Shortest Path Fast protocol, OSPF routing protocol, which is just an example of many dynamic routing protocols out there. In the third module, constructing an Ethernet switching network, we introduce a number of technologies and concepts related to the layer 2 of the TCP/IP protocol stack and the OSI protocol suite. So, Ethernet switching basics is what we start with in this module, understanding Ethernet switching, the role of a switch, how it makes its decisions, how it uses MAC addresses to determine where to send frames that it receives from a particular device. And then we talk about a way to break down a big broadcast domain into smaller broadcast domains in order to improve on the security and stability of our network, but also to reduce what we call BUM traffic, broadcast, unknown, unicast, and multicast traffic. That traffic that switches typically flood in our network. Now, if any of this does make sense to you right now, do not worry. We shall look at all these things in relative detail all through the course. We then introduce the main protocol that we use to limit loops or to prevent loops in a layer 2 network where we have implemented redundancy. Normally, once we implement redundancy in a network, it comes along with loops, but we need some protocol to prevent those loops from infinitely looping within our network. That is the spanning tree protocol. We shall talk about the different versions or the different varieties of the spanning tree protocol, STP itself, and then RSTP, and we'll hint a little about MSTP too. We talk about redundancy at layer 2, inclusive of Ethernet link, redundancy or link aggregation, including Ethernet link aggregation, which is link level redundancy, iStack, intelligent stack, and also cluster switch systems, which are link level and also device level redundancy. And then we talk about inter-VLAN communication. After splitting our one local area network into several broadcast domains, how do we implement communication between those different broadcast domains? After the third module, we go ahead and talk about the fourth module. The fourth module is network security and network access basics. So here we introduce the concept of basic security of our network, controlling access to our network, who is allowed to log into which device, which IP addresses are allowed to access which IP addresses using access control lists. And then we talk about authentication, who is able to log into which device to perform which actions for how long, using the AAA authentication, authorization, and accounting. After that, we introduce the concept of NAT, network address translation, and also look at its basic configurations and uses in today's networks. After module 4, we go to module 5, which is really now the application services on our network, what actually our networks are giving us to use, the number of applications talk about in this module. This module has only one chapter, network services and applications. We talk about trivial file transfer protocol, dynamic host configuration protocol, and also hypertext transfer protocol. We'll talk about each of these briefly, and a few more protocols like the network time protocol. We then talk about wireless networks. Wireless networks have become a twin brother or sister to our wired networks. In fact, we find almost more implementation of wireless networks in the enterprise today than wired networks. So it's only relevant that we talk about wireless networks at the very entry level of network engineering. So in this module, we introduce wireless local area networks, talk about Wi-Fi, talk about CAPWAP, and other things that help us provision a wireless network to work together with a wired network in a typical enterprise network implementation. Wide area network basics. So sometimes we have one branch in one part of the world and another branch in another part of the world, and we want the two branches to be able to communicate. Well, that is no longer a small local area network in one building or one campus or one university, like Rwanda Polytechnic. It's no longer that small network. It's a large network. It's a network that covers a wide area. We need some different cabling, some different technologies at layer 2 to implement that kind of network. We need things like point-to-point protocol, things like point-to-point protocol over Ethernet, things like MPLS, things like segment routing that we need to implement at that level. Well, in this module, we introduce a wide area network basics and talk about a few of the protocols, how they do authentication, how they do their own security to validate that this is indeed a user or a device that's supposed to log into this network, to those kinds of basic concepts of wide area networks. And then in the 8th module, we go ahead and talk about network management. All through these modules, talk about several network devices, talk about routers, talk about switches, talk about access controllers, access points. Now, these are devices that are typically going to be somewhere in your rack, in some different places in the building. Well, you're not going to be walking around with your laptop as a network administrator. If you want to log into each of these devices, you need some kind of management platform. You need some kind of management method to access these devices, tell them what to do, make some changes, determine who is able to access what, daily operation and maintenance of the devices. You can't be walking from rack to rack, from level to level of different buildings, checking up the devices. You want to set up some kind of system for you to remotely access the devices and do the functions you want to do on them. You want to set up some kind of system so that if the device CPU is overused, it's going to send you some kind of notification. If a cable is unplugged, you get some kind of notification on some kind of network management system. Well, in this module, we talk about things like that: network management and operation and maintenance. IP version 6 is the new generation of IP. Well, it's not the next generation of IP as many people call it. It's the new generation. It's the current generation of IP. Well, most of us are stuck to IP version 4, but it's old and its addresses are almost used up. In fact, they are used up for most of the regional internet registrars. There are only a few ISPs that still have addresses, and most of the addresses we are deploying today are going to be IP version 6 addresses. Also, IP version 6 has a lot more benefits to its use than just more addresses available. So we introduced IP version 6, so you could consider using IP version 6 in your first role on the job, in your first deployment of a network. We talk about basic structure of an IP version 6 address, the differences between IP version 6 address and IP version 4 addresses, the types of IP version 6 addresses and what they do, and basic configurations of IP version 6. Finally, the final module is software-defined networking, SDN, and also automation basics. Well, this module, unlike these few previous ones, does not have only one chapter. It has a total of 2 chapters, SDN and NFV basics. SDN is software-defined networking, and NFV is network functions virtualizations. The two concepts normally confuse a lot of people to make them think they are the same or even closely related, but it's not true. They are quite different, only that one of them is conceived at a function of another. But we'll talk about this. Software-defined networking is a way of dividing the control plane from the forwarding plane, so that they are different, so that we can have some kind of controller for our network, and the typical devices are just doing the forwarding. That comes with several benefits, as we shall see. Network functions virtualization is a way of virtualizing network functions. So instead of having them running on traditional network gear, they run on x86 server hardware or on virtualized machines as functions of some kind of software functions of the network. Well, network programming and automation is also a new field into networking, and this is where you're going to be asking yourself, so do I need to be a programmer to be a network engineer? When we come to this chapter, I'll explain all that to everyone. So this is what we'll be covering in HCIA Datacom version 1.0, and by the end of this course, we expect that you'll have the ability of setting up, designing, configuring, and implementing, deploying a small to medium-sized enterprise network, including troubleshooting, simple tasks. You'll be able to be an associate of a senior network engineer. Welcome to HCIA Datacom version 1.0.